are you there? And Cailey, can you give us an investor's perspective on how you make money and how you think of investing in exploration companies, maybe porphyry exploration companies? What's been your experience? Thank you for those thoughts.
Thanks very much, Simon. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me on. Pleasure to see you too, now Professor Wilkinson.
Hi, Cailey. Yeah, good to see you.
Good to see you. It's been a very long time.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so just for the audience, a little bit of background. As Simon said, I was a geologist. It was a long time ago. I think most people would say once a geologist, always a geologist, but I was at the Royal School of Mines when Jamie and I had a lot more hair. I think that was about 25 years ago now, it would have been. But yeah, I'm on the Blackrock Natural Resources team, and we manage, it's the largest money manager in the natural resources space. We manage about $25 billion. The largest, the lion's share of that is actually in the mining space. And there is some misconceptions about sort of what we look at. You know, exploration, people think the size, because of that size of that money, exploration companies don't have a space in our portfolios. And just to quell that myth, that's not true. We have less capacity we can put to work in smaller companies just by virtue of the size of our funds. But on the whole, we are able to invest, and we do. We're not particularly worried about where the country is, where the project is in the world. There are some restrictions on some countries we're unable to invest in. We're pretty commodity agnostic. We look at all commodities with the exception of thermal coal. And size and stage does play a little bit of a part, less so on stage, but you know, they do come in hand. And I think, you know, things that are sort of micro nano cap type size, we do struggle with, but on the whole, what we look at is size potential. So, you know, sticking with the porphyry theme, that's the attraction of porphyries for us, because while you may be I don't know, a 10 million pound company now, a porphyry discovery will soon and quickly change that. And, you know, typically we've seen the value of porphyries well north of $1 billion on a lot of the companies that we own and have looked at. Liquidity is just always an issue for us, and time frame to investment is an important attribute that we have to look at. You know, porphyries do take a long time to discover. They take even longer to develop. And if we invest in a company, we have to have some, we have to be conscious of liquidity so that we're able to at least exit at some time or trim our position, you know, as and when we need to, because money comes in, comes out of funds. So we need some element of liquidity, and that's always the challenge we do have. In answer to Simon's questions, what kind of things do we look at from an investment perspective? Well, obviously the geology is very key. Most porphyries typically are of a world-class size. They're not always of a world-class grade or quality, and they're not always in a world-class jurisdiction or in a world-class business. So we have to weigh up all those factors as well. But, you know, grade is obviously king. We would look at something, you know, if it's going to be underground and a block cave, it's probably going to need to be north of about 1% copper equivalent to really fly. Obviously something like Winu, or, you know, some of the stuff that's at surface, that the lower grade can work. We always find it can be a little bit of a challenge. And so when we think about the quality of the resource, we have to look at the quality of the drilling as well. You know, deep holes, if it's a deep buried deposit, I always look at what, you know, is the core being orientated, because when you're drilling deep holes and you might be doing low diameter drilling, is the hole in the right place? So that kind of thing's important. QA/QC, obviously. And then things on the metallurgy, what's the mineralogical assemblage? Are we into chalcopyrite, or are we moving into bornite, which is obviously going to get much more exciting? Are there any sort of nasties in there? The network that's done on the ore. So standard stuff to see if it can produce a commercial concentrate. And then also on the geotech side as well, the competence of the rock, particularly if it's going to be an underground block cave. What's the caveability? And that may take time, but you need to understand how well it might be able to cave. So all those sort of things weigh into the questions and that we have to ask ourselves when we're looking at a potential investment. And like I said, the starting point is quite high for a porphyry, because usually size can be of a world-class nature. The second thing, obviously, we have to look at is economics, whether it's open pit or underground, operating costs versus capex. Again, typically porphyries have a big capex tag associated with them, particularly if it's going to be a block cave. Although, what is quite pleasing, we are seeing some new technology coming out. There's some well-known mining companies now, some experts in block caving, for example, who have new kinds of technology that they're trialing on some of their mines, and those look very appealing. They're relatively early stage, I would say. Traditionally, mining has been a very slow industry to adopt new technology, and that's partly because there's a long lead-in time, so it can be a bit frustrating. But we do look at that, and we are hopeful that I think actually over the next, let's call it 5 years, I think new techniques and improvements will be made in regards to porphyries. I mean, let's face it, this is where the bulk of the world's production comes from, particularly in copper, as Roger eloquently described in his opening slides. I mentioned about jurisdiction. We do like new frontiers, Ecuador being a good case in point. There are some other countries as merging, Japan, for example, although that's more on the epithermal side. Philippines, I looked at 20 odd years ago. There are countries around that haven't really been well explored, and I do think even with the resurgence in Australia, which is producing some excitement, I think there will be further opportunities coming up. Obviously, new frontiers often equates to new challenges in terms of infrastructure. Infrastructure is key for porphyry type deposits. You need access, roads to ship the concentrate out. You need power, you need water, etc., etc. So all that's important. And obviously, if you're going into a new frontier, which is an underdeveloped country, that can be a challenge. So in that case, being in a developed country already is obviously a massive advantage. And then perhaps a final thing that we look at is management's experience, board, particularly technical experience or track records in either finding porphyry deposits. I think a lot of the speakers have highlighted the importance of understanding geology. Not all porphyries, in my experience, they are mineralized and economically mineralized. So you have to be conscious of that. What you may find is an alteration system, but you might be looking at an alteration system for a long time. So it is a challenge. And also the other part of the sort of management piece is obviously ESG, which is now become a very important factor. It's always been embedded in our investment process. And if you're not a good social citizen in your country, if you don't have a good board, if you're not reporting to the standards expected by the listing that you're on, those are all things those are all flag up as rather red throughout our investment process. So they're all things we have to be conscious of. And then perhaps sort of the final thing to think about is sort of, I guess, the opportunities and challenges of investing in porphyries and exploration companies. I mean, the opportunity's pretty obvious. If if you're fortunate enough to invest in a company before they hit the discovery hole, then the returns on your investment will be substantial, to say the least. We're living in quite fast markets at the moment, particularly down, we've got a double whammy of fast moving commodity prices and markets, and a resurgence in exploration. So that makes things very challenging to stay on top of everything, and B, trying to find the next, the next resolution or next escondida. It is obviously getting harder, but there are lots of exciting stuff we're seeing. And as I said before, we are looking at world-class mines. That's the appeal to us. And if you find a porphyry, I think you've got more chance of finding something which is world-class than you have if you found a sort of narrow shear zone hosted gold deposit, for example. So getting in early is challenging. We tend not to. In my experience, I wish to say hand on heart that we were good enough to pick up all the ones which are in the generative stage of exploration, but that's rarely the case. We usually get in post-discovery, but I also find that they're still in that beautiful shape of the valuation curve that keeps going up. So you get that big hit on the discovery. The value of the equity keeps going up as they drill it out and find more, and it gets bigger. And then it goes through this lull as a company goes through the feasibility study, and starts to put economics around, and the engineers sadly dampen the geologist's fire throughout most of that process. And that's where we, for our money, that's where we are often challenged. We've financed many mines over the years, and we still continue to finance mines, but you've got to be in there for longer. A lot of small junior emerging mining companies have struggled to make the transition to be a miner. We've had a number of examples of companies that have overrun or got things wrong as they've commissioned. So that is often, in some regards, ends up being a bigger risk than actually going through the exploration round. And the large capex tags that I talked about earlier, that can scare the hell out of a lot of investors, particularly on the smaller retail side of things. So while that doesn't, there is, if a junior company is going to go through with development, there's going to be substantial dilution ahead of them, because there's only so much debt capacity they're going to be able to take on. The challenge is a lot of the junior companies have, the biggest one is obviously money. Putting deep drill holes down, drilling out a porphyry is not cheap. It's much cheaper to do a shallow, narrow vein quartz type gold deposit. That's much cheaper to do. Porphyries is expensive, but it is more systematic. And I think once you have made that discovery, you can be more systematic in your approach. So I think those are all some of the challenges. Getting the experience, like understanding any deposit, it takes a while to get your eye in. When I've been to see deposits, I'm always very pleased when a geologist, I can point at some core and I can say, what grade is it, not seeing what the assays are, and they can go, yeah, this is about 1%. That's fabulous. I know straight away. And then I'll ask them why, what are they seeing? What's the visual confirmation? What's their reliability? But that, in terms of sort of targeting, the green vectoring and that is great, but where's the, it's particularly what makes a lot of these porphyries fly is having a high grade core, particularly if that's in the starter pit or, some starter element of the deposit. So being able to get their eye in to follow that high grade is absolutely tantamount. So, you know, and then the final piece just on the sort of opportunities and challenges, I guess, is valuation, because we've seen plenty of companies where, you know, they've had a discovery, we're a bit late, we get to meet them, it sounds absolutely fabulous, and they've already got $500 million market cap. And so the market's already pricing in not only the discovery, but the resource, the metallurgy, the geotech, and everything else that's probably going to follow for the next year. So having faith that there's still value to be had, that can probably be the biggest challenge. But there are opportunities out there. There are opportunities to grow, and I just think that it's fabulous to see this resurgence again, not just as a geologist but as an investor, and the excitement in some of these opportunities that are appearing. Right, I've probably waffled on enough. So back to you, Simon.
Cailey, thank you. That was a tour de force, and I had a bunch of questions that I was going to ask you, but you answered them as you went through, so thank you for being so thorough.